Shalom. This is Yair Davidiy, speaking to you on behalf of Brit-Am Hebrew Awareness. Today we are going to diverge somewhat from our usually subject matter and talk a little bit about contemporary affairs and recent history and anti-Semitism and Adolf Hitler and the Ukraine and different things that come up. Or they're all connected somehow or other. And they're all of interest, and they bring out points that are worth considering and matters that are worth knowing. So at the moment we're in the middle of a conflict between Russia and the Ukraine. Ukraine borders Russia, was once part of Russia. Part of the Ukraine is populated by people who identify as Russian. And the two regions of the Ukraine that border on Russia have succeeded, and they wish to unite with Russia, and Russia wishes to absorb them. And not only that, but Russia now has further aims on the Ukraine, possibly to take over the whole country. And part of its justification for this move is the desire to remove the Nazifying, the Nazi influence that is present in the Ukraine, that is present in government circles, in Ukrainian culture, and in Ukrainian military and official policies. On February the 22nd, 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered military forces to enter the breakaway Ukrainian republics of Donetsk and Luhansk. And Russia recognized these regions as sovereign states, fully independent from the Ukrainian government. After that, in 24th of February, 2 days later, or a day and a half later, 2022, Putin announced what he called a special military operation to demilitarize and de-Nazify. Now, in other words, to remove the Nazi influence on the Ukraine. And he launched a large-scale invasion of the country. And the alleged Nazi character of the Ukraine is often referred to by the Russians. They have declared their desire to de-Nazify the Ukraine is one of the reasons they have invaded the Ukraine. And there is a Ukrainian army unit that does have Nazi ties, openly declared Nazi ties. Relatively speaking, it may not be that large, but it exists. It is officially recognized and sanctioned. The Nazis may not be that influential, but they are tolerated and they are there. And it has to some degree official sanction. And the matter goes even deeper than that, as we shall see. It goes right back into the very foundations of the Ukrainian state. The Ukrainian national hero is Bogdan Zinovy Mikhailovich Khmelnytsky, 1595 to 1657. In other words, he lived some time ago. He led a national uprising against Poland and Lithuania. Then Poland and Lithuania were together in one state. And they ruled over the Ukrainian area. And he led an uprising of the Ukrainians against these Poles and Lithuanians. And in the course of the uprising, they massacred the Jews, because the Jews were available victims, and so they wiped them out. They killed anywhere between 18,000 to 100,000 Jews. The numbers are disputed. Many of the victims were buried alive. Women had their children ripped out of their wombs, and cats inserted in their place, and the wombs sewed up. This was done whilst they were alive. Victims were cut to pieces, forced to kill one another. A lot of atrocities were committed by Ukrainians following Khmelnytsky. And today Khmelnytsky is a Ukrainian national hero. Statues are raised to him in public places. His image appears on money bills, currency, has pictures of the Khmelnytsky on it. A government award for public service named after him, the Order of Bogdan Khmelnytsky. And his name is mentioned, and the present ruler of the Ukraine has justified this, saying that even though Khmelnytsky may or may not have been anti-Semitic and an enemy of the Jewish people, he was important to Ukrainian history. He did give an expression to Ukrainian nationalism. And this fits in, this coincides, this links in with the Ukrainian toleration of Nazi-type units and Nazi-type doctrines being inculcated amongst the Ukrainian people. There were other events throughout Ukrainian history. There were pogroms and attacks on Jews. An estimated 31,000 Jews were killed between 1918 and 1920 in the Ukraine. Pogroms were carried out in Ukrainian territory, and between 35,000 and 50,000 Jews were killed. After that, when the Nazis took over the Ukraine, many Ukrainians, at first at least, collaborated with the Nazis, and they helped carry out Nazi war crimes against the Jewish people. The concentration camps were often staffed by Ukrainians and Lithuanians. They were the ones who did the real dirty work. The Germans were the overseers and their rewarders and their directors, but the real dirty work was actually done by Ukrainians and by Lithuanians. On the other hand, it has to be admitted, there were a large number of Ukrainians who helped the Jews, who helped save the Jews, and not all Ukrainians are the same. And according to statistics, the rate of anti-Semitism amongst the Ukrainians is lower than that of most East European countries. So we have to take everything into proportion and consider it. Not only that, but the present Prime Minister of the Ukraine himself has Jewish parents, even though his wife is non-Jewish, and he has had his children baptized as Christians. So the Russian, on May the 1st, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Viktorovich Lavrov, who himself was born to an Armenian father and a Russian mother, and he gave an interview on May the 1st to an Italian television broadcast, and when he was asked why Ukraine needed to de-Nazify when he was asked why Russia needed to de-Nazify the Ukraine if its president was Jewish, Lavrov responded by suggesting that Adolf Hitler, like Volodymyr Zelensky, had Jewish heritage. He said, so when they say how can Nazification exist if we're Jewish? That is, how can the Ukrainians say that if their ruler is Jewish? So Lavrov continued, in my opinion, Hitler also had Jewish roots, he said. In my opinion, Hitler also had Jewish origins, so it doesn't mean absolutely anything. For some time we have heard from the Jewish people that the biggest anti-Semites were Jewish. That is what he said. And it could be that other people have said much worse things in the past, and regularly say them, even in the state of Israel. But for some reason, these words of Lavrov touched a raw point, and there were harsh reactions, severe reactions from Israel. The Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett condemned Lavrov's comments, and he said that using the Holocaust of the Jewish people as a political tool must cease immediately. Israeli Foreign Minister Yair said that the Russian ambassador, the Russian envoy to Israel, had been subjected to a tough conversation, to being summoned to the foreign ministry. And he also said it is unforgivable to blame Jews for their own Holocaust. Hitler was not Jewish, and Jews did not murder my grandfather in Mauthausen, Lapierre said. He said the Nazis did it, and all these comparisons to the Nazis are unforgivable and infuriating. Okay, very good, but he seems to forget that the comparisons to the Nazis are not being made out of nothing. The Ukrainians themselves, or elements within Ukraine themselves, are actively imitating the Nazis, wanting you to see the comparison, the similarity between them and the Nazis, glorifying the Nazis. And this is being tolerated and even exploited for pro-government aims in the Ukraine. Lapid continued to say that Russia needed to apologize to the Jews, to the memory of those who were killed, and he suggested that Lavrov read a history book instead of spreading false anti-Semitic rumors. Yair Lapid himself, in his statements, he himself heads a political party that regularly incites against Haredi Jews. That's how he got to power, that's what made him what he was. His father, Joseph Tommy Lapid, was an popular Israeli radio and television presenter and other things. And according to Wikipedia, he fiercely opposed the ultra-Orthodox political parties and actively sought to exclude any religious observance from the legal structure of the Israeli state. He himself was anti-Jewish, was against the Haredi Jews, and so was his father. So we have this, everything has to be taken in its right proportion, but nevertheless the point is there. And this claim that, so this brings up a claim. Lavrov said that many Jews are anti-Semitic, or have been anti-Semitic, and he is correct on that point historically. Many leading anti-Semites in history have been, at least, partly Jewish. It was Thomas of Torquemada, who's a Castilian, that is a Spanish Dominican friar, and he was the first Grand Inquisitor in Spain in the late 1400s. He used torture to extract confessions, and he had those who were found guilty burnt at the stake. He recommended that they be burnt at the stake. And his name has become synonymous with cruelty, religious intolerance and fanaticism. And many of his victims were Jews, Anusim, Maranos, people of Jewish descent who were suspected of still keeping Jewish practices. Torquemada himself, Thomas of Torquemada himself, had some Jewish ancestry. Another historical example in more recent times, this was the Yevseksia in Russia, in Soviet Russia. Yevseksia was a Jewish section of the Soviet Communist Party. They were established in 1918 by Lenin with the consent of Lenin, and their aim was to carry communist doctrines, the communist revolution, to the Jewish masses. And they forced Jews in Russia not to be religious, and they prevented them from carrying out the Brit-Am circumcision. And they compelled the Jews to cease to practice Judaism. Rabbis were exiled to Siberia, rabbis were killed, synagogues were converted to clubs or communist centers. And who was it were doing this? Who carried this out? Jews, Jewish renegades, serving the atheistic communist cause. And there were quite a lot of them. So we have Jews who may be anti-Jewish, may be anti-Semitic. And on that point, Foreign Minister Lavrov of Russia was correct, at least as far as it goes. So this brings up to the other point that Lavrov made, for which he has been criticized. He suggested that Adolf Hitler may have been Jewish. Was Adolf Hitler Jewish? Now we have indications that Hitler believed that amongst his ancestors were Jews. Whether this belief, this suspicion, this worry of his was correct or not is another point, but he believed it. And we're going to point out a few factors that may lend some justification for further inquiry into this matter, that there may have been something there, and from the point of view of an historian it may be of interest. We had Julius Streicher. Julius Streicher was a good friend of Adolf Hitler. Julius Streicher used to publish a newspaper that incited against Jews, spread lies and calumnies against the Jewish people. And Julius Streicher was responsible for inuring the Germanic people, the German peoples of Germany, to destroy the Jews. He depicted the Jews as killing Christian babies, doing things to Christian women, and doing all kinds of things. He invented things, he invented proofs. Sometimes he took incidents that had some factual base in them and he twisted them and magnified them. He presented the Jews as being straight out demons, whereas he himself in his own private life was even more demonic than he depicted the Jews as being. It doesn't matter. His propaganda was very convincing. A lot of Germans accepted it. Had the taste of pornography for them. They couldn't get enough of it, and on the basis of that, they justified tormenting and torturing and wiping out the Jewish people, or attempting to do so. So Julius Streicher, 1885-1946, he was a good friend of Adolf Hitler. He had been with Hitler from the beginning. Streicher himself was a sexual pervert, a rapist, a fraud, a trickster, a gangster, a thief. And there were numerous complaints against him, even from the Nazi officials. They wanted to remove him because he also offended Nazi bigwigs, such as Göring. But despite the pressure, Hitler kept him in his place and protected him. And Hitler was an avid reader of the newspaper of Streicher. Hitler said that the newspaper of Streicher was the only one he read from one end to the other. Streicher was a pedophile, a sadistic torturer, a rapist, and so on, and even boasted about it. He wasn't ashamed of it, he didn't hide it, he boasted of his deeds. He thought it was a good thing, it showed his manhood in his eyes. Eventually he was hanged. The Nazis hanged him at Nuremberg in 1946. He is quoted as saying, Julius Streicher is quoted as saying, you have to have a good dose of Jewish blood in your veins to hate that race properly. That's what he said. You have to have a good dose of Jewish blood in your veins to hate that race properly. And Julius Streicher, and this quote is from Randall L. Bytwick, Julius Streicher, a man who persuaded a nation to hate Jews. And that is in effect what the Streicher did, or helped do. They didn't need much convincing, but he helped push them along, he helped push it forward, he helped stir the pot, as if to say. He was an anti-Semite, a Jew baiter, and a wicked person. And he himself indicated that he may have had some Jewish blood, and he was very close to Hitler. And the name Hitler, the name Adolf Hitler, has been found inscribed in Hebrew characters in a Jewish cemetery in Bucharest, Romania. Adolf Hitler could be a Jewish name, or it was the name of a Jew who was buried some time ago. And the London Daily Mirror in 1933 published a picture of this grave, of the headstone, where it was written Adolf Hitler in the Jewish cemetery. But it was not the same Adolf Hitler, unfortunately, who became head of Germany, but the name had been used by a Jewish person. And the picture, after the picture was published, Hitler was worried that he might have some Jewish blood, or the Jewish blood that he had might become publicly known. And he had a law made defining Jewishness, where it was explicitly written to exclude Jesus Christ and Adolf Hitler. That, in other words, that even if it could be proved that Jesus Christ or Adolf Hitler were Jewish, they would not be subject to the same penalty as all the other Jews. And this apparently was on the Nazi law books. A study of male relatives of Hitler in recent times, a few years ago, they showed a predominance of Y-cap haplogroup E1B1B1. And this haplogroup is quite common among Jews. It's relatively rare amongst Germans. It exists, but it's relatively rare. It's quite common among Jews. About 20% of Ashkenazim have it. 40% of Sephardic Jews have it. It's also found amongst Gentiles, North African Berbers, Greeks, and other peoples. It's not Germanic at all, it's. The father of Adolf was Adolf Hitler. He was born in Austria. Alois himself was born to an unknown father. Alois was born in 1837. His father is not known. Later he was adopted, and legally, but in effect his father is not known. The mother of Alois was Maria Schickelgruber. That was her name, Maria Schickelgruber. She was working as a maid. And the possibility that exists that Maria may have been impregnated by a Jew. And this possibility was examined by Hans Frank. Hans Frank was a former member of the esoteric Thule Society. And this gave rise to the Nazi Party. It was in effect a kind of devil worshipping, like a pagan, very bad association of no-goods. No-goods. Hans Frank had been associated with Hitler almost from the beginning. Hans Frank, 1900-1946, Hans Frank acted as a personal lawyer at the beginning of Adolf Hitler. Hans Frank was a personal lawyer of Hitler. At one stage he was Minister of Justice for Bavaria. Bavaria is a major German province. Later became governor. Hans Frank became, during the course of the Second World War, he became governor of a province, the general government of a province, a Nazi province. The Nazis made their own province a part of Poland. And as governor of that province, he was responsible for the death of hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of Poles and Jews. Before he died, he expressed remorse for what he had done, and he returned to Roman Catholicism. According to Frank, at the beginning, when he had still been a personal lawyer of Hitler in 1930, Hitler told him that his nephew, that is the nephew of Hitler, William Patrick Hitler, was the son of the half-brother of Hitler. William Patrick Hitler, according to Adolf, was trying to blackmail him. William Patrick claimed to have evidence that the father of Alois, that is the father of Adolf Hitler, was a Jew. And he was asking Hitler for money in order to keep quiet about it. So Hitler asked Frank in 1938 to check it out, to find out what is behind it, if there's anything behind it. And keep a secret, of course. So, Hans Frank examined the case. He found that in a certain person named Leopold Frankenberger, the young son of the employer of Maria Schickelgruber, may have fathered Alois. The father of Leopold Frankenberger was Jewish. Apparently his mother was not. Leopold Frankenberger, according to Frank, was Jewish, and the affair occurred in the town of Graz in the Austrian province of Styria. Styria is in the southeast of Austria, bordering Slovenia. Alois was born in Stron, near Dollersheim, in northern Austria. Apparently, Maria Schickelgruber worked in this area in the southeast of Russia. She got pregnant, and then she went back to her hometown in Dollersheim, where she gave birth to Alois. When the Germans took over Austria, later when the Germans took over Austria, on the Anschluss, they absorbed Austria. And all inhabitants of this township, Stron, and the neighbouring township were evacuated. And the site, by order of Hitler himself gave the order, was to be used for military training. And this virtually destroyed its devastation. They practiced artillery firing and so on that obliterated the whole place. Hitler had something against it, and must have suspected that somewhere there was evidence of a Jewish antecedent in there.